Hello, everyone. I'm Elise Swami. I am here with my co-hosts, Keely Severson, Erik Johnson. We're exposing mold. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but we are starting a new segment with Erik Johnson on mold avoidance. Since this is extremely popular, people want to know more. People want to know more information directly from him, since it seems like there's a lot of confusing information being circulated out there that is not quite clear on what to do and how to do mold avoidance. And today we wanted to talk about intensification and detoxification. We've heard some people in the community describe this as the waterfall of toxins as a sign of recovery for mold. I don't really know what that means. Erik, could you maybe clear the air on the differences between what intensification is? What is detoxification? What does that look like when you're going through it as a mold sensitive person?
Well, back in the 1980s, doctors didn't know that mold was toxic. Yeah, I know they claim they do now, but no, they didn't. And they thought it was an allergy. And they thought that if you got out of a place that was making you sick with allergies, that the moment you walked out, you would recover. You'd get better instantly. Just you've removed the antigen, you're not having an allergic reaction. And that's not what happened. People would get out of a building that was poisoning them, but at least they said it felt like poison, and they'd get worse for a while. In fact, some people got so much worse that they thought, oh, wow, I'm doing the wrong thing by leaving. And they went right back where they came from because at least it felt normal. And it turned out that there was some kind of strange detoxification mode where they were giving off whatever it was they were absorbing in this bad environment. They were exuding it and they were reacting to their own process of detoxification. The way we discovered that is out in the desert, we'd become more sensitive and we'd feel like we're getting worse. But if we hung out for a while, we'd go back into town and we'd feel a little more functional, a little bit better. And it'd take a while to slip back down to where we were before. We knew that this period of letting something go was somehow beneficial. And that's where I decided, whatever this is, I need more of that. But at the same time, it's very disconcerting when you go into a bad environment and then feel like the very act of leaving makes you worse. Very counterintuitive. So essentially, that's all it seems to be, is an observation of intensification of symptoms and a corresponding increase in sensitivity upon leaving the environment. And at that point, when you're exuding these toxins, you not only affect yourself, but other people around you. If they're sensitive to it, they can tell that you're giving off something bad. It was really cool being able to test that because there were new support groups coming out for chronic fatigue syndrome. These people would come together in a room in hospitals, houses, auditoriums, various places that they would gather to discuss chronic fatigue syndrome. And I go, well, if this intensification, this detoxification process where people are exuding something is for real, I have an easy way to test this. I will just arrive at these meetings before anybody else and see how the room feels. And then as people arrive, use my sensitivity to see if the room feels worse to me as more and more people gather. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually, enough people would get in a room and I guess whatever they had on their clothing, in their hair, whatever they were exhaling, added up to the point where I was getting sick to that I can barely stand up. I have to leave the room. So this tells me these people are exposed to something bad. They're carrying it around with them. And that's where I started my quest to get doctors to look into this.
So do you think you were reacting to those people's detox, or do you think you were reacting to mold contamination on them?
Well, at the time, I just assumed that I was reacting to something on them. And it wasn't until interacting with people who had taken a shower, changed their clothing, so theoretically they got all the stuff off them, and still having a reaction to them. I'm going, no, there's more to this. So you have to go to step one before you can proceed to step two and go, there's a deeper layer to this. They're actually exhaling something. It's coming out on their sweat. And that was pretty exciting to read about Stachybotrys, trichothecene mycotoxins, because the guy that first entered this into the literature, Dr. William Croft in 1986, that's exactly how he tested for trichothecene mycotoxins, was by gathering people's sweat. So if he could test for this toxin, which is the same thing we're suspecting in these sick buildings, the Stachybotrys, the black mold, the T2 producing toxins, and here this guy who put it in the literature is actually detecting this by what's being exuded in sweat, there we can put all the pieces together.
Then what's your guidance for separating the concepts of when someone is intensification and they're reacting to contamination and when someone's just reacting to detox on someone?
Well, if somebody makes a break with all their contaminated stuff, their clothing, they take a shower and they feel better for a little bit, then whatever they feel, now that they're in their safe zone, if they wake up in the middle of the night and they're breathing something out and it gets on their pillow, or they're sweating and it gets on their sheets, that's obviously from them. So that's how you tell that it's not from the contamination in their clothing, because you made the break. You got it away from you. And it's very hard without knowing for it to tell the difference, because it feels exactly the same. A contaminated object from your sweat feels exactly the same as having the substance get on clothing in a sick building. So you have to go through the process of making the break, knowing that you're in a safe zone, and then exhaling, exuding, sweating, to be able to tell the difference. And yeah,
So
it can be a little complicated at first. But once you know that you went through the process of decontamination, then for it to come out, the way it exudes, the way it comes out, is what tells you which it is.
So the way that it comes out. The reason I ask is because it seems like people who haven't gotten completely clear at times are describing intensification but calling it detox, and it just seems like there's not a ton of clarity in which is which, because if someone hasn't gotten fully clear or they're still spending time in a location that could make them sick and then wearing all that stuff around their other family members, then I think that it's confusing to call that detox because you still have an active source point there. So I just think that it's a very confusing differentiation, and that some people are reacting to residual effects of a bad location or bad items, but because the intensity of that is hard to understand and without repeated experiments, that it's very often just blamed as detox.
Well, that's why I went after researchers, not patients, because when you're brain fogged, it's really difficult to work all this out. But having worked it out, I wanted to get in touch with scientists and go, there's an algorithm to this. There's a procedure. There's a way to tell how this whole thing proceeds. And you start with the source point, the colony, the thing that's putting out the toxin. So that's your colony. That's the source point. And then it gets a little complicated because now we've got wind direction to deal with. We've got stuff that blows off the source point and moves in different directions. So now we've got plumes. So you could go through a plume and be contaminated, even though you weren't near the source point. So that's one step in the process. So now you understand, okay, it's not the source point that contaminated me, it's the plume. It was what was in the wind. And now I've gone through that and I've gotten home, which was safe. It felt good to me, but I'm still reacting. Damn it, it's on my clothes. My clothes got contaminated. So that's your primary contamination, your primary source of exposure is not being in the direct area, but the cross-contaminated object. So now you're breathing that in, and then you start exhaling it later. And that's some kind of detoxification. So that's another layer. So you go through this whole thing of knowing where it came from, how it moves, to separate each step in the process to understand what you're dealing with. And once you arrived at all the different things of, okay, I've gotten clear, I've gotten all the contaminated objects out of my environment, and then I'm breathing on my pillow and it's affecting me. Or I sweat and it got in my sheets and that's affecting me. And then you finally arrive at something else that's even deeper, and that's the amplification. The way, the range of how these things reach out and grab you changes according to weather conditions. When there's a storm, breathes on my pillow, and normally it'll affect me at just a couple inches maximum, and then the storm comes in, and now I can feel it at 3 to 5 feet. So that's what I call the amp up. The range, the effect that I'm talking about. But in order to arrive at how this range changes according to weather conditions and ion shift in the middle of the night, you have to go through all the other stages and narrow it down to this one primary kind of contamination, and then witness how that range changes. And that's what I started my group for, the effect, because I wanted to talk about how the quality of this range changes according to atmospheric conditions in a manner that is not really consistent with how we'd expect evaporation or a degradation of a chemical to behave. What is the strange atmospheric input? And other than you guys, I never got anybody's interest to the point of being able to even broach the topic.
Well, hopefully with us working to try to separate and differentiate some of these ideas to bring more clarity to the community, we can maybe connect with more people and get more support for fundraising things like a Getting Clear location. I know that you always did the mold tour to show that, but I think it would be cool to have a place where people could go and do these proximity experiments where they could stay clear. Because the question comes up is like, how do I know it's mold when it could be Lyme disease or it could be EBV? And you had the best answer to that, which is
If you get
get
clear, the
away
desert
all of
goes
the
away.
mold and see what symptoms you still have left, which is probably, I mean, in our collective experience is like no symptoms are left. And I'm sure we all think that we have Lyme too, because I know we've all had some exposures there.
Yeah, I hear this theory that, well, if you feel bad during times of weather change or during a full moon, that's the parasites. The parasites are dancing to the light of the moon. The parasites could feel the barometric change of the impending storm. Okay, that's great. Then how come the parasites see fit to not dance when you're out in the desert and you got away from mold? There's still weather changes. There's still barometric shift. There's still a moon. Well, what did the parasites forget? What happened?
That's a really good point. Yeah, because we do hear that a lot of it's parasites, or you have to treat parasites to get better from mold illness. And all of that stuff focuses on something other than really fully detailing the understanding of mold. And it's so much more complex than what people think. And people very frequently say, well, I've been doing mold avoidance for this amount of years. And then you can tell by their descriptions, it's not mold avoidance as we describe it, and then that's upsetting to hear that you're doing it
Exactly.
wrong.
The first thing that I noticed, I mean, like the first observation was that I would get out of a bad zone and then I would suffer from contamination plus this exuding of toxins like on my breath. And I go, well, that's kind of special because that's not really acting like other things. And not all molds act this way. Only certain toxic molds seem to even do that. So if something doesn't exert this effect on me, that's not really what I'm concerned about. So by honing in on this, having a very narrow and specific idea of what causes this type of process, this algorithm, this different step-by-step process of what's going on, I have a better idea of what I am trying to avoid rather than running from black stains or anything that looks like mold or what's on an orange or an onion. I don't worry about any of those things. If the mold in question doesn't set this process in motion, I ignore it. And people say they're avoiding mold and they're doing none of the things that I'm doing. They're not even trying to understand this process.
It seems like people think doing mold avoidance is just buying a trailer and then washing their stuff according to whatever washing protocol.
Exactly.
And then, of course, they never got clear. So, and I think just failure to do this first step of never getting clear. If you've never gotten clear, I don't know how you've ever done mold avoidance, because that's how you start, isn't it?
Exactly.
Getting clear is your desert experiment. And because it's such a controlled environment where you have so much control over what's going on around you and what's with you, that you can understand sort of how this stuff behaves and how your reactions are according to this stuff, and your contaminated stuff is what I'm referring to. And I feel like the desert experiment has been misconstrued, Erik, to sound like, oh, the desert experiment means if you have this level of sensitivity, you must live in a tent in the desert forever and never come back to civilization again, which that is completely not it. The desert experiment is to clear you from everything so that way you can focus in on your sensitivity, your sensations, according to what's around you, what you bring with you. See how it changes during the weather. I remember you telling us if you're in a location and nothing changes in terms of how you feel during a weather change, you're in a good location, because those atmospheric shifts have such a weird effect on these contaminated objects and how they can make you feel.
Yeah, in fact, the very term, the desert experiment, and my use of GFD, the godforsaken desert, derives from 25 years ago when I approached mold groups and I said, well, you can go to a pristine location and get clear. And this sets this whole thought process in motion to understand what mold illness is like. And you go, well, where do you go to do this? And I go, well, I went to the woods, actually, but to make sure that you're in a really trustworthy, pristine environment, the desert is nice because there's no wood around. There's nothing. So you know that you've really gotten clear. So the desert is really good. You go, Erik wants everybody to live in a tent in the desert. They go, no, this is just to learn about it. That's all. I can just go camping there for a while. I didn't tell anybody to live in a tent in the desert. And they would just repeat, Erik wants everybody to abandon their children, kill their pets, suffer out in the desert with only scorpions and snakes for company. And I go, well, if that's how you want to be about it, able to do this experiment, fine. I don't care if you do mold avoidance or not. I don't give a damn. I don't care if anybody does mold avoidance. I just thought this was an interesting thing.
You know, Keely talks about like everyone thinks mold avoidance is buying a trailer. And I think, I don't know where this came from. I think we know people in the groups building this perception, but it's like before you go and spend 40, 50,000 on an ATC or casita, it's like first step, you really need to learn how to hone in on your perceptification skills, or else you're going to run into the same problems, whether you're in a trailer or whether you move to another home or to another apartment. These problems are going to continue following you. And then I think that's where people who have done this, they go by the trailer. It's like, okay, I'm out of mold. I got the trailer. I'm still sick. Mold avoidance isn't working for me. I think that's where things go wrong because they're not focusing on step one, and that's really building their skills and getting clear and understanding how things can amp up and make you feel.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to throw in is when they want to destroy the concept, they say Erik wants everybody to suffer. Erik wants people to do it his way. Erik doesn't give a damn. I don't care if anybody does mold avoidance. When the people were getting sick at the school, I told them it was better to get outside, but if they wanted to stay and suffer, that was their choice. I don't care. I just thought it was really interesting that this was really making people sick and doctors didn't know about it.
You know what else is really interesting? The human reaction to this information. It produces the most hateful vitriol I've ever seen. I've never been the subject of as much hate as I have since I started associating with you. Thanks a lot. I'm just teasing. But I am serious that having these conversations within the mold avoidance community and daring to suggest that they're missing a piece or what they're doing isn't mold avoidance, I can see how you got to the point of saying, I really don't care if you do mold avoidance or how you do mold avoidance. I really just want research into this concept, which is the only reason you've ever been involved in it. But humans have a really rude response to this, and I don't understand why. I don't understand
We
why.
need a sociological study to try to understand why people behave this way.
I think people don't like to be criticized. People don't like to be told that maybe they're doing something wrong. Because I don't know, has mold avoidance turned into like a cultish type of following in some other groups where it's like, you know, they believe this and they connect to this leader and this is how it is. And if you question anything about it, you know, I'm going to go haywire.
I mean,
Like
those are the exact accusations against us, that we're cultish and that we're Erik's cronies and that we're awful to people who suggest things differently. And it's really like we're reading people's descriptions. We're seeing that they're not clear. We're seeing that they're reacting to contamination. We're seeing that they're only blaming detox and they haven't ever gotten clear. And we're saying, like, hey, you have to do this if you actually want to have these results. And it's like, how dare you tell me this? Yeah, a sociological investigation.
I'm good. I got the information I need. I'm living in a house in normal civilization. I'm not dying or living in my RV traveling for 20 years. I mean, like, I don't have to do this stuff. And so if people want to say I'm in a cult, that's great. I'm just trying to provide information from the source that has helped me, that has helped you, Keely, that's helping Erik. I mean, we're all in homes, we're all doing fine. Yes, we still have this problem with our health, but we know how to manage it so much better, and our lives are so much more normal than they've ever been.
And at least we know
Because
the
of this
problem. At
information.
least we're not chasing a fibro diagnosis or wondering if we have Lyme. If we go a little bit backwards, we know where to look, and we know that we can use our senses to find it, and we know maybe it'll take some time or something drastic to fix it or stop it, but we at least aren't getting spun out on confusion of, well, it's this, or this. I really have no idea, because we know we've done those experiments. We've went backwards and still applied this information consistently to the point that we've been able to get results. And I think it's our dedication to this one, our health, the absolute best. And that's a hill I will die on, because I wouldn't have recovered if I wasn't able to stay honed in on this specific information, because I would have been so confused with just what happened with my house in the last year.
Absolutely. And you would be doing the same thing everyone else is doing. You'd be in the parasite groups doing cleanses. You'd be in the liver flush groups doing liver flushes. You'd be in the amp coil groups trying to find the next device to heal from, to do some frequencies, because you're so desperate, because you're so sick. But we're not at that zone anymore, and it's because of this information. And we believe that people deserve to have this information, to have the choice. Hey, this information exists, they're providing it, let me see if it works for me. If it works for you, amazing. I am so happy. That makes me feel good that I possibly saved a life and saved a family from breaking up. And that's really what the motivation for me at the end of the day is to really do this, to try to help people who don't have the answers, who have been screwed over by everyone in the medical system, and just want to try something different to see if it works, because it saved my life. So that's all I have to say. Do you guys have anything else?
I mean, well, I was just going to talk to you a little bit more about what you said, because
Oh, sure.
I mean, did you ever have a point where you were like, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, like, how was it for you before you fully understood? Did you feel like you got misled by different treatment strategies or blaming different things, and then how did that turn out for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I initially went on this journey, I was so desperate for information because I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to lose my husband. I thought my life was going to end. And so I was working with functional doctors and trying all these medicines, and I just kept getting worse. And, here I see Erik talking about mold avoidance and getting free and clear. And then all the pieces of the puzzle started connecting, but he didn't really have anything super established. Now, there were other people in the community that were talking about mold avoidance that I thought I could trust, that, okay, they're helping people, they're providing a practical aspect, some information. And that information is, okay, get out and get into a trailer. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's what I have to do. And yeah, getting the trailer was good, but I don't think it was absolutely necessary for me to really understand mold avoidance and how to get well, because that whole concept of focusing in on your perceptions and contaminated objects and the power that they can have over your health was never discussed. And so as I started working one-on-one with Erik, I started seeing, wow, mold avoidance is completely different. Mold avoidance is nothing like what these other people are saying, getting an RV, a casita, whatever. It was like night and day. And as soon as I started speaking out in those groups, talking about, well, wait a minute, you guys are taking Erik's information and you're totally screwing it over and you're making it to be something different. And that's why people on here are not getting well and they're traveling for 10 years. Let's try to correct some stuff. I was kicked out of all these groups, and that was really a godsend, because I was able to focus in again with Erik and really understand, okay, Erik, let's work together here. What do I need to do? I'm your student. I will do,
You weren't
whatever
just
I
kicked out of
do.
the groups, you were trash talked. You're like, people reference you in articles about how awful you are. Everyone hates you. Like, you dared to learn something that no one else cared to take the time to learn from the person who is actually teaching it and created the theory that everyone else thinks that they're following, but they're not. And then you were absolutely hated for it, and you still are. Like, how dare you? I love you, though, just so you know.
I'm okay. I'm okay with taking the heat if people want to hate me or blame me for reasons or things that have happened in these other groups. Like, I don't care. Like I said, I'm living a good life. I'm about to give birth to my first child. I'm doing great. I have the information I need, but I'm still here pushing back against all this madness that I've seen that's been happening in these groups to make mold avoidance seem like you got to live in the desert in a tent forever. You got to be in an all metal
Godforsaken
forever. Like, that's not how I want to live my life. And I see that's not how Erik has ever been talking about. This is how you have to live your life. This is just temporary stuff that you could do to sort of help you understand your sensitivities and how that relates to your environment. And once you learn it, you can go ahead and move into normal society and not feel like you're dying at every second of the day, not feel like, oh, I need a therapist because I got to work through my transgenerational trauma. Oh, I have uncontrollable anxiety. I don't know why. Oh, I have all these skin reactions. I don't know why. Like, I'm not dealing with that stuff anymore. And I have a better quality of life. And that's what I want for other people. And if that means sticking to the source, and that's Erik, I'm not trying to sit here and make a platform for myself. I'm trying to make a platform for Erik. So that way his information isn't misconstrued and we can get more research into this, because if it's been helpful for us and other people that have paid attention to Erik, then imagine how many other people it could be helpful for. Imagine how many other people are suffering on a day-to-day basis in chronic panic and anxiety, when all that could be eliminated by just employing a few steps into their life. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, I also think we're getting to the point where we're not just speaking to other people who have other mold avoidance teachers. Now we're attracting a whole lot of new audience. So it's fresh faces with fresh perspectives who are more open to this information and learning it from Erik because of the work that you've put in to build him a platform to kind of spread his ideas more and get the message out more. And I think now we're finally starting to see some people have a little bit more understanding and ask real good questions. So it's all good.
Yeah, and things have to happen. Uncomfortable things happen when paradigm shifts occur. People have to slough away old ideas or old beliefs and start looking into new ideas, or these, I mean, for Erik, this hasn't been new. This has been always the information. It's just been twists and turned to hell. So we're just trying to uncrinkle all of that and get people to talk to Erik, get people interested. Let's get researchers, doctors, other people who are interested, who are finding their patient population not getting better from what they're providing and what they're doing. And it's a totally new concept, sort of like Erik talks about Semmelweis, with the hand washing. How was he treated? Everyone thought he was crazy and washing your hands was a stupid thing, until now it's like, you just do it. You just know to wash your hands. And so I think we're sort of in that zone of like growing pains. We're all trying to figure it out, and people are starting to understand that this information is helpful for them if they do it according to how the source has been telling everyone to do it. So sorry, I'm like out of breath. Keely, for you, because now your situation is extremely unique, because you didn't do like a desert experiment, or did you? Like, you went from an apartment to a house, but this information and these concepts were still really helpful for these situations that you ran into in your different living situations. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I didn't know any of the terms of getting clear or intensification, or I don't even think I knew, maybe I knew masked and unmasked. I'm not sure because that was 3 years ago now. But I wasn't fully clear in searching this house And so I think I would have had a better idea of the amount of repairs that this house needed had I done something like the desert experiment and fully got clear. So not doing that.
Erik, are you hearing weird noises from her mic?
Yeah, total static noise.
Oh, I thought it was mine. I was trying to play with my speaker. Okay. Yeah, Keely, your mic is like really weird. Sorry to
I'm gonna
interrupt.
see if she turns her device off, if that fixes it. Hang on.
Oh, yeah, you're good now. You sounded fine just now.
Okay. I was
Yeah, I
just
don't know
saying
what
that I
was.
think it would have. Is it okay now or not?
You're good. Yeah.
That I wasn't fully clear and I wasn't fully unmasked when I found this house, and that did get me into some trouble because I didn't know that I moved from one exposure into another. I did overly rely on just a visual of how things looked, which all of our water damage was like on the outside of the house, so relying on the visual for the inside didn't really serve me well. But once I started realizing that I was in trouble, and then I did know the terms, just relying on the strategy of I'm still reacting because there's still mold here. What it did was it allowed me to be unshakable with advocating for myself against family members who also lived here but didn't believe there were still mold problems. And so people were starting to kind of just feel like Keely was losing her mind, and she's like just needs to go on some medication because she's obviously crazy that she's still saying that she's reacting to everything. But I never questioned myself for being crazy. I never started blaming the trauma that I endured as a younger child for the reason that I felt the way that I did. I never started thinking it was a different illness, like a mental health illness or a different autoimmune condition, even though several of my symptoms could have fit into those categories. I just really stayed focused on trusting my senses and going through the stages of what Erik taught me, and really knowing that if I'm still symptomatic, there's a problem here, either in the terms of contamination or in the house. I knew that I wasn't reacting to my own detox because it was just like a prolonged sickness that just kept getting worse. So that was kind of easy to rule out. But if I didn't know these stages and I didn't have the trust in my senses that I do have, I don't think that we would have been able to isolate all of the individual locations where we had to remove mold, which at some point we can discuss in another podcast what that looked like. But there were at least 12 source points that I had to do proximity experiments with, of going to a local park and then coming back and saying, this is where it felt the worst. And then fixing that spot, and then the next spot would pop out at me. And even as we were making the repairs and we'd get rid of the worst one, and then the next worst one would pop out at me as the new worst one, my family was still kind of skeptical at that point of, it's never going to be enough. No repairs are ever going to be enough. It's always going to be something else. And the fact of the matter was, there was just so many areas to repair that for a while it did look like it was always something else, until we got the majority of the source points out by me staying focused on this method. And now
This is stuck on me.
we're recording, honey. That's just a magnet.
Yeah, I can't get it off.
And now the house, it's one more very obvious repair that I know that we need, and there could be more, because I'll never say that there's not more at this point after having to cycle through this for so many different repairs. But I'm sure you guys can tell just by how my forehead looks and how I'm able to stay focused in a conversation without forgetting what I'm saying. And I'm not, bright red like a fireball. I mean, you can see clear signs that I'm going in the right direction. And had I not stayed focused on the strategy of understanding the things that Erik's theories have taught us, I probably would have freaked out and sold the house or let people talk me into going on some medication, which would have permanently dulled my senses and made me more confused. So I don't see any other way that I personally would have recovered. So I'll always advocate for this because it saved my family. My kids now are to the point where they have sensing skills and they're understanding. And really, if no one's going to be honest about this information and doctors are never going to fully teach it and society is never going to fully acknowledge it, then like you say, Alicia, I'm also satisfied just knowing that my kids have the information that they need to protect their own health so that they're not misguided by society and culture and the state of the medical system currently. So, of course, we just want other families to have that benefit. I mean, how many families break up and then you hear somebody saying, well, my wife was a sociopath or my husband was a narcissist? And like, were they really? Or did everyone just have personality changes from extreme brain damage from exposure and they were completely misled every single step of the way on where it was, how to fix it, if it was gone, if things were contaminated, if things could be washed? And, you know, is that just a symptom of still exposure? Which, of course, in our experience, Alicia, we know that's always exposure for us. Thank you, Erik.
Always grateful for you, Erik. Erik, I want to get personal with you. But let's talk about how this all came to be. Like, if we can get maybe like a nutshell, like what was people's initial perceptions of you when you provided this information? Were people open to it? Were people like, this guy's crazy, doesn't know what the hell he's talking about? I mean, because you have this background that is like, I mean, how could you not believe this guy? I mean, he was in the military, he did biological warfare training, he got sick from mold in Hitler's bunker. He was patient one in the original CFS cluster. I mean, this guy's got photos with all the ME/CFS researchers around the world trying to talk about this. Like, what did people make of this information when you started putting it out there?
Well, it depended on who it was. When I took other members of the original chronic fatigue syndrome outbreak in Incline Village to the bad buildings, they go, oh, wow, that's interesting. They believed it and they acted on it. Some people left their jobs working in bad buildings, moved to other areas like Reno and recovered. And then they tried to go back and tell the doctors, and they weren't believed, so they just gave up. And I thought it was a darn shame that the doctors and the researchers were fighting this so hard. And that's why I agreed to help start this new syndrome. So you ask, how did people react to this? Well, it depended. If they were another patient in an informal setting, they were more than likely to believe it and act on it. But the higher echelon, the doctor or researcher, the more resistant and the more they disliked it and the more they didn't want to be told anything about it.
And it's sort of like that today, you know, like you have the people that are like, I'm on board, and then the people that are not, and then the researchers that are calling you crazy, or they just want you to live, never be reintroduced into society again. They want you to live in a tent in the desert, but it's like, we literally do this so that way we don't have to live in a tent in the desert. That's the whole purpose of mold avoidance, is to come back to society and live a normal life and not feel like you're dying or you have to be on medication.
That's where it got to be really fascinating, because I had to analyze people's motives for rejection of this information. And it seemed like the academic mind rejects it because they don't already know it. And that reason alone is enough to put them into antagonism. But then something else started to develop as people began selling cures and getting a following, and felt that they had some authority over chronic fatigue syndrome, then they would become antagonistic simply because I was challenging their market share, their product sales, their ability to influence others. And I began to analyze them to see, okay, are you rejecting this because you really don't believe it? Or is it because this is interfering with your agenda? And over time, the more people felt that they had developed a following and had some authority, the more I could see the real reason why they were fighting this so hard really had nothing to do with disbelief. It was simply because I was threatening their authority.
You brought out a good point, and I think that's why we have haters at the level that we do, because we are threatening their, their money-making schemes, their level of authority, their theories that they want to push on other people, that they want to go viral so that way they can make a name for themselves. It's a lot of ego that we're up against, and it's like we're coming at it at a more scientific level. Let's, like, for the greater good level, let's look into this. Let's see why this is working. And these people are trying to shut it down by saying, oh, mold avoidance is impossible. Mold is everywhere. These people want you to live in a tent in the desert. It's like, no, let's not go there, because we know what your motives are. Or it's just trauma. Oh, yeah. That's the famous one, when you work with a practitioner that is not giving you results, because of course things cannot be remedied with just supplements and exercise. If you're in a moldy environment, they like to blame your trauma. You're sick because your grandma dropped you on your head when you were 2 years old. I mean, I don't know. It's just ridiculous. So when you see a lot of backlash and a lot of haters, great. That's good publicity for us. I mean, any publicity is good publicity, but you have to question their motives. But anyways, do you guys have anything else you want to say? We're good. I feel like I'm gonna run. I feel like I ran a marathon. I'm so out of breath. What are you gonna say, Erik?
Yeah, people just make this so complicated. I don't know why. They go, Erik wants to instill these weird cult beliefs. I never asked anybody to believe me. I just took them to the bad buildings and let them scream.
Oh, that's so funny. I mean, okay, one final question. In your opinion, do you think that these other mold groups that sprouted out, or like mold avoidance groups that sprouted out, have really helped sort of us in terms of like mold awareness and getting things recognized and getting maybe information to the hands of a researcher or someone that could further investigate this? Like, what has been the result of these good and helpful people that have tried to make avoidance more practical for other people, from what you've seen? Like, has it been beneficial at all?
No, it's been extremely counterproductive. And if you look at the emergence of mold illness with Stachybotrys, Ruth Etzel, the Cleveland pulmonary hemorrhage incident, toxic mold first entered the media and became so compelling, so easy to study. All you had to do is just analyze the people and the reaction to this particular mold. And it was such a good starting point that it seemed assured that the investigation would proceed from there. But as people made themselves mold experts, they said, well, not all mold is toxic, so you can't say mold is the problem, or all molds are the same, or you can't say toxic mold because molds are toxigenic, and started creating confusion. They turned this into such a clown show. They took something that was very easy to analyze and turned it into something impossible to make sense of. So no, they just drove us backwards.
something Keely had mentioned in the chat here. She feels like, you know, these good and helpful folks and, you know, creating practical mold avoidance, whatever bullshit, they're just like CFS doctors, spreading more confusion, diluting important information. You can't help but wonder, like, what is their true motivation? Are you really trying to be helpful, or are you harming this population even more? I mean, you don't really see too many people coming out on the other side of the coin who are following these folks. It's like they're still living in a trailer for, you know, 10 years and trying to figure things out, and have started to wonder that maybe mold is not my problem. Maybe it's actually these chronic infections I have, or they, you know, everyone else looks elsewhere. So it's an interesting time that we're living in, an interesting situation, but I feel really grateful to have listened to you, Erik, to have joined with you, Keely, and doing this work together, because I think this has been what Erik has needed to sort of get things going here and really take this up a notch. He just needs more supporters. He needs more people like us. So those of you who are listening, you know, if you feel compelled enough, you know, reach out. Let's see how you can help us, and continue on with the information, and donate to our organization so we can do these higher level things, and just learn more from Erik, so that way you can better your health in ways that you never thought possible before. So thank you guys. We appreciate you. This was an awesome episode on mold avoidance, Erik. Like, this series is like really exciting for me, and I can't wait to dig more into strategic mold avoidance and learn more from you. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Keely. We'll see you next time. Oh, Keely, you have the